Dave Talks Comics, Episode 49, Who's OHotMU? Dave Talks Comics is a podcast on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comics I have read and cartoons I have watched. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com. On Twitter, at Dave Talks Comics. Email can be sent to dave@davetalkscomics.com. I talk from my notes on these comics. I don't go panel by panel. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This podcast is not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics and cartoons, I may spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will be talking about Who's Who and the OHotMU, the official handbook to the Marvel Universe. This will be the fourth installment of this. Just to note, the last couple times that I talked about Who's OHotMU were in episodes 33, 35, and 37 of Dave Talks Comics. Who's OHotMU Part 4. Okay, starting off with DC first. The next character, the next entry in the first issue of Who's Who, the definitive directory of the DC Universe, is Arcane. His full name is Anton Arcane. He had a niece, Abigail, and a brother, Gregory. His original base of operations was the Balkan Mountains. He first appeared in Swamp Thing number 2. He was kind of a scientist or something like that. Sorcerer, scientist, somewhere in that range. And eventually his body was destroyed and he was resurrected in like a spider-like form. The Swamp Thing and the Swamp Thing characters is really a world that I have very little knowledge of. It's something I should probably correct. I should correct at some point. Whether you're talking about the original incarnation of Swamp Thing or the later, the original run of Swamp Thing, or even the later issues of it where Alan Moore was writing it, or even stuff more recent. None of it. I really haven't read any of it. So I'm really not that familiar with Arcane either. But according to the entry, it says Arcane uses no weaponry, save perhaps for his loyal unmen, who were these part human, part creatures that he created or fabricated from things, people, creatures. I'm not sure. Anyway, moving along. The next entry is Arion, Lord of Atlantis. This is his title that I remembered seeing on the stands when I was younger, but I never really picked up and read. Apparently it began, I did a little bit of research, and it began he first appeared in Warlord number 55, and it was a backup feature until I think Warlord number 62, and then at that point he got his own title, and that ran for about 35 issues. It was written by Paul Kupperberg and drawn by Jan Duursema, I believe is how the name's pronounced. And Arion was a sorcerer. He lived in Atlantis, I think, 100,000 years before. 100,000 years ago? Something like that. Or maybe it wasn't quite that long ago. But it was in the past. This is before Atlantis sank. And I'll be getting to that in a minute because the Atlantis entry is coming up. Okay, so Arion was a sorcerer. He was Lord of Atlantis, and I once again did not read much of this. Arion's magic abilities, I'm reading now, have been reversely limited over time. After wielding great and almost limitless power, Arion is now forced to tap a source of energy to perform magic. Blah, blah, blah. He can project illusions using existing dust or water vapor. Also possesses a limited but heightened sixth sense. He's become an accomplished swordsman. So I think this is a title that changed somewhat with Crisis, but I'm not sure if that's what changed it. When I say Crisis, I mean, of course, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Okay, the next entry is Arkham Asylum. Arkham Asylum, of course, existed right after existed in the area of Gotham City, just north of Gotham City, and was founded in 1921 by Dr. Amadeus Arkham. There is a floor plan here, although it is not to scale, of course. And the entry here talks a little bit about the history of Arkham Asylum. Arkham Asylum is probably best known in the Batman family of books as the place where Batman's villains normally get sent. There's a famous story of Arkham Asylum, I believe it was a graphic novel written by Grant Morrison, which I have not read. And I've got to be honest, it's not high on my list of things that I want to read. I just don't have any particular reason to want to read it. I can't remember who drew it. But this picture is drawn by Steve Bissett and John Tottleben. Although I think that might be because there's two different images here. But it's Arkham Asylum for the Criminally Insane is what the sign says. Okay, moving along. The next entry is Atari Force. Atari Force is a book that I read a little bit of. Atari Force first, there was I think 2 series initially. The first series was a series of comic books that came with Atari games, because Atari, of course, I don't know if they're still in a separate company, if they're a division of another company. But the first series of comics, and that's probably where I first read some of them, were a series, were these little mini comics that came with games, mini comics, smaller comics that came with Atari games, and I think I probably read some of them there. I might have 1 or 2 issues of the Atari Force series that followed this, which ran for about 25 or 30 issues. The image here is drawn by Eduardo Barreto, who was one of the later artists on the series. I believe the initial artist was Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. And basically Atari Force was a team of individuals from different planets who were teamed up against a dark empire. This may sound reminiscent of other stories. And the 2 Atari Force miniseries were linked, but they weren't all the same characters. There was one character who was in both, and this is according to the entry, and that's Martin Champion. But the first series, the ones that came with, and I believe there's only 5 issues, I think they're hard to find, and I don't know if they've ever been reprinted. They took place, there was only 5 individuals, they took place earlier, and then the second series basically took place about a generation later. The one character who was in both was Martin Champion, and his son is in the second series, and you've got a bunch of other characters in that series. So, I don't know. It's one of those series I'm kind of curious about, if only for the art, because I like both Jose Luis Garcia Lopez art and Eduardo Barreto's art, and so I'm kind of curious to read it for those reasons. I don't remember who wrote this, but it's probably a pretty good series. Okay, the last entry I want to talk about is Atlantis. And this is, of course, the DC version of Atlantis. I talked about the Marvel version of Atlantis, I think, on the previous episode. On the previous episode in which I talked about Who's Who. So there's a little bit here about some of the characters. You get headshots of Lori Lamaris, who I believe first appeared in... Well, I'm not sure. She was certainly a character in the Superman world. She was... And you have Ronal, and then you have Aqualad and Aquagirl and King Volko. So I think one of the more interesting things... Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. Arion in 46,000 BC. Okay, so that's about when Arion was around. 46,000. But they do talk about... Atlantis in approximately the year 9600 BC, Atlantis found itself faced with a natural catastrophe. Okay, so it was sometime after that Atlantis sank, which is interesting because if you go to the Marvel universe, and I have the Marvel entry for Atlantis here, it says Atlantis was originally a continent in the North Atlantic Ocean that boasted one of the most highly advanced human civilizations of its age. Approximately 20,000 years ago, 5,000 years after the reign of King Kull, the entire continent of Atlantis sank beneath the sea in a fiery catastrophe, in a fiery cataclysm. So that was 20,000 years ago as opposed to being closer to 10,000 years ago in the DC universe. So that's interesting. And there's two cities here that they... Tritonus? I don't know. And Poseidonus. And apparently the people of Tritonus look more like half fish. They look like mer people, like mermaids, mermen. Because I know Lori Lamaris, who I believe is from Tritonus, was part mermaid. And she appeared in a lot of, I think, Superman stories. And she was one of Superman's girlfriends or something like that from the Silver Age. I'm not sure exactly what her first appearance was. But... And they mentioned telepathy here, which I don't think is something that is present in I think that's a DC concept, that the people of Atlantis use telepathy or have telepathy, whereas the people of Atlantis in the Marvel Universe do not. Of course, Namor does not, although there's that weird story in Namor where he communicates with these, which was very Aquaman, where he communicates with these heat rays, which are kind of look like manta rays, except for they absorb because he uses them to help. There's a fire in New York City or in the Hudson River or something like that, and he uses these creatures which live at the bottom of the sea, underneath the crust of the earth or something like that, who live in very harsh conditions to absorb the heat from this oil spill fire in the Hudson River, which the whole thing reeked of Aquaman. And in the 12 issues of Namor, the John Byrne series that I read, that was the only instance where they showed that. Anyway, okay, back to DC. So this is the last entry that I've read that I'm going to talk about right now for DC Comics. I got about 5 more to go, and those will be in the next installment of Who's OHotMU. Moving on to the Marvel side of the house, now reading from the official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, Issue 1. The next entry is Attilan, Home of the Inhumans, which was founded approximately 7,000 years ago on an island in the North Atlantic, located about 200 miles southwest of Iceland. Although in the 1950s, the entire island complex was moved by Inhuman technology to a remote valley in the Himalayan mountains, so it could be better hidden. And eventually it was moved to the blue area of the Earth's moon, near the outpost of Uatu the Watcher. I've read some of the old Fantastic Four issues from the fourth, I believe it's the fourth and fifth, or maybe it's the fifth and sixth Marvel Masterworks collections, which I think is around the time that they were introduced. There is no date or no first appearance given here for Attilan, and I'm not sure what the first appearance of the Inhumans is. But you get basically a kind of a layout of the city, and I read a good deal of the text here. There isn't a whole lot of text. A lot of it is pointing out different parts of the city, and it does extend below ground. In a previous installment of OHotMU, I mentioned the alpha primitives, and they are mentioned here. So, well, that's about it for Attilan. Next is Attuma. He is an Atlantean. He's an enemy of Namor the Submariner. He's very strong. He's very tall. He's 6'8". He's 410 pounds. He first appeared in Fantastic Four number 33. His base of operations is Skarka, a fortress city 200 miles north of the city of Atlantis in the North Atlantic Ocean. Let's see, is there anything else of importance here? I mean, I could quote you some. Whereas most Atlanteans are strong enough to lift 4 tons, Attuma can lift 40,000 tons. Or most Atlanteans can swim at a speed of 30 miles an hour, Attuma can swim at a speed of 60 miles per hour. His strength rivals that of Prince Namor. He cannot breathe air out of water. He's capable of lasting approximately 10 minutes out of water before he begins to suffocate. And he carries a 3-pronged sword. And who drew this picture of him? It was Walt Simonson. Very nice, very nice. I'm not sure if he had drawn a number of stories that featured this character, but it's a good drawing. Okay, so the next character is Aurora of Alpha Flight. And she first appeared in X-Men number 120. Her real name is Jean-Marie Bobier. She has a twin brother, Jean-Paul Bobier, also known as North Star. Her origin here is very short. Aurora is a mutant whose power manifested itself in her late teens. That's the origin. So I looked it up, and apparently this issue came out about 9 months before the first issue of Alpha Flight. And I've read the first 12 issues of Alpha Flight, and you still haven't gotten much in the way of an origin. The first 12? No, I haven't read through the first 12. I've only read the first 4. Yeah, I've read through the first 4, and so far still not much of an origin of Aurora. Although you do know that she has a split personality, as Aurora and Jean-Marie Bobier are like 2 different personalities, and they don't like each other. She can fly. She's very fast like her brother, and they do have this power when they touch hands. They can create a very strong light, which is equivalent of a lighthouse. I think they say, yeah. When they link hands, Aurora possesses one power that she literally shares with her brother North Star. When the 2 siblings link hands, they can generate a bright light equivalent at maximum intensity to a lighthouse beacon, 1 million foot candles. Okay, so, and of course the picture here is drawn by John Byrne. Speaking of Byrne, the next few pages, and I'm going to go over all of them, are the Avengers. And I'm not going to go through all the Avengers that are here, but they list about 20 or 30 of them here. They headshots of each of them. They indicate when they joined the team and when they first appeared with the team. And Yeah, it's interesting because you have some people who appear here more than once, like Henry Pym, who was originally Ant-Man and then became Giant Man and then became Goliath and then became Yellow Jacket. So you have headshots of all four of those. And then you have also Clint Barton, who was originally Hawkeye and then later became Goliath 2 and then later went back to being Hawkeye. Let's see, any other... It's interesting to note that of the first 18 people listed here, although Henry Pym is 4 of them and Clint Barton is 2 of them, there's only 2 women, those being Wasp and Scarlet Witch. You do have the Vision, who of course is an android. You have Black Panther, who I guess would be the first character who's not Caucasian. Then you start to see more women, like Black Widow, Mantis, Moondragon, Ms. Marvel, Tigra, She-Hulk, Captain Marvel 2. They also list a few people who are not officially members, but have been granted temporary status or reserve members, like Hellcat, Jocasta, Rick Jones, Jarvis, who is Tony Stark's... I believe first appeared as Tony Stark's butler, I think, and then later became the Avengers butler, I think. Yeah, because he first appeared in Tales of Suspense, number 59? 59, yes. So that, of course, was an Iron Man story. I think that's about it. I don't have any particular thoughts. I've read some of the old Avengers stories. Not a lot of them. There's some that I want to go back and reread. But and the headshots are all drawn by John Byrne and inked by Terry Austin. Okay, so next you have a 2-page spread on Avengers Mansion. Now, Avengers Mansion is located at 890 Fifth Avenue, which is between 70th and 71st Streets in Manhattan. This Avengers Mansion was originally built by Howard Stark, which would be Tony Stark's father, in 1932. It is quite big. A lot of it is actually below ground, though. They've got room to store, I believe it's 4 Quinjets. They have apparently, let me see if I can get this right. The house itself is a cross between the style of an English townhouse and an aircraft carrier. Dinner for 25, as well as being able to land a Quinjet at full throttle, or indeed any plane with an arresting hook. I find that hard to believe, but then again, this is the Marvel Universe. There is a gymnasium. There's a combat simulator room, which sounds kind of like the Danger Room, although they don't reference the Danger Room here. Hank Pym has a complete operating theater and a morphology and pathology laboratory. Cold storage rooms. Let's see, what else? They give you some stats on some of the computing power here. They say that the sub-basement's ultra-secure Avengers Assembly Room is connected to the Cray Company's next-generation 10 gigabit, 2.5 gigaflop per second computer. That doesn't sound too powerful by today's standards, but I'm not sure. And it has 22 gigabits of RAM. Yeah, once again, that does not sound very impressive. Of course, this was from the early 1980s, roughly 30 years ago as I record this now. And there's even a robotics fabrication area which is able to quickly assemble working robots. Almost any electromechanical system or device made of metal or plastic. Okay, and then finally you have the Avengers Quinjet. And this is a very technical page. I'm not even going to try to read this. There isn't much about this. I don't think they list... It says Wakanda Design Group T'Challa Chieftain. Okay, so it was... Wait a minute. Stark International Quinjet A1, United States, Wakanda Design Group T'Challa Chieftain. Okay, I'm not sure what that means. Because on the one hand, they reference Stark International, on the other hand, they reference Wakanda, so maybe it's a joint venture between the two. But this thing has all kinds of specs. I mean, ridiculous. It's one of those pages where you've got little arrows pointing with numbers, and then you've got a legend on the side indicating, okay, so this is the canopy external release handle, and this is the temperature probe, and this is the avionics computer bay, and this is the rudder, and so on and so forth. They've got 34 different things numbered here. Anyway, that about does it for the first issue of Marvel of the OHotMU. There's the only thing left, and I'm not going to go over these right now, are the alien races, and they just get, there's 4 per page, and the most interesting thing there is probably the representatives, and then there's an appendix which lists very short entries, just like 2-sentence entries for a number of other characters. So maybe I'll go through those the next time that I record a Who's OHotMU. A few more comments on the things I already talked about. I mentioned something about the Inhumans when I was talking about Attilan, which is the city where the Inhumans live. And what I wanted to add is that the Inhumans, well, their first appearance kind of was in the issue 36 of the Fantastic Four, and that would, of course, be the original run of the Fantastic Four from the 1960s. And Medusa was the first of the Inhumans to make an appearance. I don't think at that point that she was identified as an Inhuman. She was a member of the Frightful Four. Now, she continued to appear in that book regularly from she and the Inhumans. Okay, well, hold on. After that, she continued to appear as a member of the Frightful Four, but then the Inhumans appeared. Her other people like Gorgon and is it Karnak, I think, and of course Black Bolt. And on the Comic Book DB, they identify a storyline from issues 44 to 48 of Fantastic Four, which they call the Inhuman Saga. And 48, of course, is the first appearance of Galactus and the Silver Surfer. I've read them. I have them on my bookshelf. Well, not the originals, but I have the Marvel Masterworks that features those appearances, or at least issue 48. And I can't remember. I know that there was a backup feature with the Inhumans that ran through there. In fact, there's a collection which came out in 2013, which is titled Origin of the Inhumans, which includes all their appearances from issues 38 through 65. I don't think they appeared in every single issue in that run, and there kind of was backup stories after a point. At first they were part of the Fantastic Four stories, but then it was backup stories. So all of those, plus there were some appearances in Thor from issues 146 to 152. So I think that's all I have to say about the Inhumans for now. When I get to the Eyes, if I ever get to the Eyes, in my Who's OHotMU feature, I will be talking about them again then, but at the pace I'm going, it might be a few years. Hopefully it won't take that long. That's it for episode 49 of Dave Talks Comics. Once again, I want to give credit to Comic Book DB and the Grand Comics database. I think they're great resources for finding information about comic books. They're not perfect, but they're very good. And of course, there's always Wikipedia as well. Questions or comments can be posted about Dave Talks Comics, about this episode, can be posted on the episode page at davetalkscomics.com, or tweet them to Dave at Dave Talks Comics. You can email your questions or comments to Dave at davetalkscomics.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I will be talking about one episode of Justice League Unlimited and then 2 episodes of Young Justice. Thank you for listening.